I live in a suburban apartment building. There's another building right in front of mine which belongs to the same complex. I live on the last floor, and even from the end of my living room, I can see the apartment of the other building as well as the passageway leading to the apartment. Unless I am very close to my living room window, I can't see the lower floor's passage in that building, but I can clearly see everything in the living room of the other apartment. I had moved into my apartment when I was 5 until I was 20. That apartment had tenants, and both our apartments would have to keep our curtains closed for privacy's sake. A few years back, they moved out and no one had stayed there very long. Now it's just empty, and we no longer have to close our curtains. Our dining table is set in such a way that 2 people have a view of that apartment, which is completely dark. I'm somewhat of a night bird, and always has been. And like everyone in the city, I don't sleep early unless I have to wake up early the next day. Sometimes I even sleep at 9 a.m. Obviously, I get up at 6 p.m. on such days and practically screw up my biological clock for days to come. Now that I have given you all the information that you need to know about my story, let's begin. My vacation had started, and my parents had gone on a vacation, so I was all alone in the house. I had woken up at 3 p.m. that day after watching all sorts of internet videos. All sorts except horror. So I quickly set to make amends by firing up my computer and searching for horror stories and videos. After a while, I started getting bored of it. Most of them were either scary things jumping out of nowhere, or they were just edited, and they were clearly fake. By the time I closed all the videos, I realized it was already 7 p.m. I prepared for my dinner, and I had it as soon as possible. Ghost videos may not have scared me much, but I could always rely on ghost stories. I was sitting at my dining table while reading my stories. I had switched off all the lights in my house. The light from the other building still illuminating my living room enough for me to still see my keyboard keys. The apartment was dark, as always. It was the first time I had read the No Sleep subreddit. The ghost stories were truly better than the videos I had watched earlier. All of a sudden, the light started flickering. I looked up to see the passage light of the other building was flickering and on the verge of going out. I didn't bother getting up to actually switch on my lights. At the moment, I thought I had already found a website for all the horror stories that I could read for the day, so I won't exactly need the keyboard anymore. Laziness had gotten the better of me, and I truly regretted it later. Shortly thereafter, the passage light went out, leaving the entire floor in darkness. I could still see the faint outline of the passageway, mostly due to the light in my own building's passageway, but the apartment was still dark. I thought nothing of it and continued reading. Some stories were truly horrifying, and I had to stop and take a break and watch some short funny videos before I could start again. During one such breather, I looked up from my laptop to see some light, sort of like a dim night light that was switched on in the other apartment. I thought little of it, thinking that someone finally had moved in. While in the middle of reading a story, I had a strong urge to look up. You know, the sort of feeling you get when somebody is looking at you? I was getting the same uneasy feeling. I looked up to see a man staring at me from the other apartment. I realized that my face must have been lit up because of the laptop screen. I waved at the guy. He didn't wave back. Actually, he didn't do anything at all. He just stood there looking at me. I continued to read the story, but I had to stop once again as the uneasy feeling had yet to go away. I looked up to see the man still staring at me. I remember thinking, what a creep. I got up and closed my curtains. My curtains were thick enough to conceal the view ahead of me. I went back to my story. Nothing much happened for quite a while. I looked up at the clock to see it was almost 3 a.m. I wasn't the least bit sleepy at this point, and I didn't have to work the next day, so I continued with my stories. It was that uneasy feeling again. I tried to shrug it off this time because I knew I had drawn my heavy curtains and there was no chance that he could look at me. I rationalized it, thinking that it was just the spooky stories that I was reading. The feeling never went away, and I finally gave in to look up at my curtains. Even through my curtains, I could see a man's silhouette staring at me. It was almost like it was inside my house and staring down at me. I ran out of the room and switched on every single light on the way. I locked myself in the room and pressed my ear against the door. If I heard any noise whatsoever, I was going to call the police. I stayed like that for a long time, frozen in fear. In what felt like an hour, I finally stood up. I must have surely imagined this. How can a man enter my house and stand in front of me just to stare at me? My house entrance was behind where I was sitting. A person would have to open the door, as well as the security door, and then walk the length of the living room, almost all the way up to my window to stand in front of me. And by chance someone had done all this without me realizing it, he would have at least done something by now. I had neatly rationalized everything and opened the door. I closed off all the lights on the way back to the living room. The only source of light was my laptop screen. I scanned the entire living room, as well as the rest of the house, thoroughly and laughed at my own foolishness. There was no man standing in my house. I peeked out of the curtain and saw no light in the apartment as well. I realized I was genuinely tired after this ordeal and was ready to sleep, so I shut down my laptop and made sure all the doors and windows were properly closed. I went to sleep in under 10 minutes. Just as I fell asleep, I saw a man's shadow, say in a low voice, "Why didn't you just go to sleep early?" I don't remember much of being a young child. Many memories before my teen years seem vague and mixed up, but there is one thing I remember and definitely will never forget. It was a simple game of hide and seek with my friend Tom. I couldn't have been older than 8, maybe 10 at the time. My family and I lived in a rural part of Texas. The neighborhood was off some road, maybe 20 miles from the main highway. There may have been 20 houses at the most. It's hard to remember, and most homes had about 100 feet between them. Each house had a large front yard and even bigger backyard. The row of houses we lived at was the last in the set of houses, and directly behind our backyard was miles of forest. The forests were crawling with wildlife, deer, rabbits, and birds. All sorts of stuff, but nothing dangerous, besides the occasional coyote. I was only a child, and for years I longed to have a companion that I could play with at home, and not just at school or town playgrounds, so it was exciting when Tom moved next door. He wasn't my best friend, but he was the only friend I had close by, so we were always playing together in the massive yards around our houses. One of our favorite things to do was play hide and seek in the woods behind our houses, with bushes and trees to protect ourselves from the opponent's search. It was the perfect place to play. We often played after dark, even though it made our parents mad sometimes. The last time we played, it began normal. We played 2 or 3 rounds, and it was my turn to seek Tom. I faced my house at the edge of where the woods began, closed my eyes and began to count. 3, 2, 1. Ready or not, here I come. I followed the sound of his footsteps while I was counting. It was an easy trick to use when my opponent steps on twigs or fallen leaves. I walked directly back from where I was standing, turned to the left and looked. I couldn't see where he was, but he sure was somewhere in this direction. I heard rustling behind me, so I quickly jerked back. I quietly scoped the area. It was difficult during the dark, but that only made it more challenging and fun. There he was. It was obviously him, slunched over, half hidden behind a large tree. I had to be quick to catch him so I could tag him. The round didn't end until the seeker tagged the hider. If not, he would find another spot and the search would start all over. So I ran full speed in his direction. He stood still, then crouched and ran off. He was surprisingly quiet and must have realized my tactic of following his sound. Once again, I could vaguely see what resembled a person hunched behind a fallen log. My plan was to sneak up to the left of him and catch him from behind, but he saw me and once again ran back, deeper into the woods. He ran to the right and then back some more. The forestry was thicker and offered more places to hide deep in the woods. I began to panic when I looked around and realized my house's back porch light was nowhere to be seen. This was a section of the woods that neither of us were familiar with and had been warned by our parents not to go to. The constant hum of various insects and the nocturnal birds seemed to stop. I was beginning to become worried. I listened hard and tried to locate Tom. I followed what sounded like a slow shuffling through the twigs and leaves. I quietly crept toward the sound, and he was finally visible. I could see Tom lying down beside a bed of large rocks. I called out to him, "Come on, man, let's just go back to the house." He didn't respond. "Let's just leave, it's been too long." "Look, you win. I give up. Let's just find our way back home." My main focus right now was just getting home. It didn't feel safe out here at all. I finally yelled out, "Tom, come on, I'm tired of this game." In the distance, I heard Tom yelling out, "Man, where are you?" Muffled by distance, I could hear him calling out to me, but couldn't make out what he was saying. I looked over at what I could have sworn was Tom and froze. For the past 10 minutes, I had been chasing somebody else. I called out, "Hey, who are you?" They lay there still for a moment before slowly standing up. I couldn't see who it was, but as my eyes focused, I could see it was wearing all black. It was at least 5 yards away from where I stood, but it towered over my small child body. Its long arms cast shadows, and it spread them out, engulfing me in darkness. I froze as it slowly started to move towards me. It made a noise that sounded like it came from deep inside its throat. It was almost like a deep and harsh breathing. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, screaming for Tom. I heard his reply and followed it, though it seemed far, as I ran as fast as I could, not looking back a single time. I could hear the noise it was making, getting louder as it followed me. I finally fell, tripping over something, and landed face first. I could still hear Tom calling out for me. It sounded like he was slowly coming closer. On my other side, I could hear whatever was chasing me, getting closer behind me. I knew at the moment I was gonna die, but I was too terrified to face my own death. I laid there face down, breathing in soil, waiting to die, as I heard this thing approaching me. I began to cry and silently whimper as I felt it stop right next to me. It still made that horrible breathing sound, like a lifelong smoker gasping for breath. It let out a scream, something that was definitely human, but still far from anything I had heard before. There was a silence as I still lay there expecting death to come at any moment. I finally looked up, ready to face that thing, and instead, I saw Tom standing there. He stood there maybe 20 feet from me, frozen and hyperventilating. I believe Tom somehow saved me that night. Not on purpose, but somehow just coming at the right moment stopped that creature. I'm sure it could have easily taken out both of us, especially how far we were from home, but it didn't. I'm planning on going out there this weekend. I won't be going out with Tom, but with another friend who I had met, who has an appreciation for the paranormal. For 2 nights, we'll camp and investigate the scene of the incident. He is greatly interested in the subject, but doesn't completely believe my story. We'll find out if anything is still out there after this weekend, though. A few years back, I was a poor college student living on his own for the first time. It wasn't easy, but with the financial help of one of my close friends, Michael, we were able to get a small 2-bedroom apartment. We were able to live somewhat comfortably, with a narrow hallway that connected our rooms with the kitchen and a small bath near the entrance. It was only $400 a month. The place was practically a steal. Unfortunately, the place wasn't in the city's nicest neighborhood. In fact, the area had the worst reputation for being a quote-unquote crime-infested hole. But it was home, and the place had the security of being one of the newer housing complexes that had been constructed by the government in hopes of raising property value. The place was built like a fort, with sturdy fence surrounding the entire property. So after spending 2 years living at that address, I had seen it all, whether being confronted by a crack dealer, hardened criminals, or even the occasional violent drunk. There wasn't much left that scared me, but one night, I experienced something that to this day still makes me check over my shoulder every once in a while. I had been on my computer for several hours when I received a text from Michael. We had been talking about our plans for an up-and-coming party. Instead of getting a response on the carpooling situation, I was asked what kind of clothes I was wearing. Confused with such an out-of-the-blue message, I decided to play along. Oh, you know, just a pair of basketball shorts and a white t-shirt, I jokingly replied. Placing my phone down, I was greeted with another reply before I could even resume my schoolwork. Hey, do you remember those string of murders a few months ago? I wonder if they ever caught that guy. Growing a little annoyed, I quickly wrote back, I don't know, but seriously, who's gonna ride with us? I need to know soon so I can notify the right people. After that, I didn't hear back from him, so I decided to take a shower and get ready for bed. Before I even got the chance to change clothes, I was attacked with a flurry of text messages. Done with calculus for the night, are we? Do you wonder how the killer did it? I bet he tied them up so they couldn't leave. Maybe he tortured them. Do you wonder how he did it? I bet it was with an axe. Still, I bet it was quite a sight. Disturbed, I started to wonder if Mike was okay. He had a history of playing pranks, but this was something entirely different. Walking across the hall, I wanted to see if he made it home from work. I quietly creaked his bedroom door open. Hey, are you home? I whispered in a harsh tone. Yeah, what do you want? He slurred in a tired tone back, meeting me at his doorframe. I was just wanting to know what was with all the creepy text messages from earlier. Acting bewildered, I could tell something was wrong. Messages? What do you mean? I lost my phone earlier tonight while I was out. I don't know who you've been talking to, but it wasn't me. Growing cold, I could feel my stomach doing flips as I realized the situation. I then handed him my phone and watched his face turn white. This can't be me. I mean, yeah, it's my number, but I would never say something like this. He then grabbed his keys and gestured me to follow him. He didn't know who had his phone, but he felt like it was necessary to report it to the authorities. Making our way to the police station, I got one last text from the mysterious messenger, simply stating, "Good night." After that, my phone went silent. My roommate and I filed our reports and went home. The phone was never found, nor was I harassed past this one incident. It's been a few years since then, and I barely think about it anymore. But there is one thing that I've never been able to figure out. How did he know I was doing calculus homework?